All right, so in this video, I'm going to talk about how to set up and customize your Nikon Z50. Hey everybody, Hudson Henry here, and this video is really just a special little video on how to set up the custom menus, controls, and custom layout to work really efficiently with your Nikon Z50. And I set it up almost identically to its big brothers, the Nikon Z6 and the Nikon Z7, which I carry all the time, which are set up really, really close to how I used to set up my older Nikon DSLRs. So I'm going to run through, I'm going to show you some menu options. We're going to pay close attention to the autofocus, custom setting menus, how I've got my custom My menu set up and why, and then the custom control buttons that you can customize on the camera to take advantage of just quickly using different buttons to access functions you might want doing sort of typical travel, landscape, and action photography. There are other videos that I've done on using Nikon's mirrorless system to autofocus on fast-moving action. It's equally applicable to the Nikon Z6 and Z7 as well as the Z50. I'll put a link to that video in the YouTube description if you click show more down below the video. And I'm also going to put a link to my review that I just did of the Nikon Z50. I've been shooting with it for a number of months now, and I really think it's an awesome camera. I can highly recommend it as a backup body or as an introduction to Nikon's mirrorless system, or to a person who's just wanting to get into digital photography and doesn't want to spend a lot of money on getting a really high quality camera. It's definitely something I can recommend for any of those purposes. So let's jump in. I'm going to go into its menu here, and as I run through, I'm going to throw on my reading glasses since I'm using the monitor and not looking through the viewfinder. And I'm going to run in, first off, you can see if I go all the way to left with the little D-pad on the back of the camera, I can choose which of these main menus I'm working in. I'm going to go to the one that looks like a pencil, the custom setting menu. And I want to run through some of the autofocus settings that I like to use. You've got autofocus, continuous priority selection. That means when you're focusing on fast-moving action, would you rather have the camera prefer having everything razor-sharp focus or getting the exact second that you push the shutter? And I think for fast-moving action, I like release. I like the shutter release to be the priority. When it comes to the autofocus face and eye detection, that's a mode you can turn on and off. I love the face and eye detection. I turn them on. I think they work great. Whenever people or often wildlife come into your scene, it'll recognize their face and or eyes if you've got a nice close-up scene like a portrait shoot, and you can flip between the eyes by using left and right in the D-pad. It just works great. There's more about that in that autofocus video that I link in the YouTube description. Points used, I use all with the Z5 or with the Z50. When I'm with my Z7, I limit that a little bit just because there are so many points. With the Z50, I think I use all the autofocus points available. AF activation. This is something that some people are going to disagree with me on, but I don't really know any professionals aside from some people sometimes exclusively shooting birds in flight that leave autofocus on the shutter button. I like to use this A4 selection right here to turn that off and make it the AF on switch only. I'll talk about programming it so that the AEL, AFL button on the back of the camera, right where your thumb hits, becomes that AF on button. But I like setting that to AF on only and using back button focus. That way my thumb focuses, my finger trips the shutter. I think those are different functions in general, and I don't see why you'd want to really combine them. Focus point wraparound, that's if you're selecting a focus point and it goes off the right side of the screen, it pops up on the left side of the screen, sort of like when you're selecting text on a screen keyboard with a D-pad. I tend to like to turn that off. I think it gets a little confusing. Some people love it. That's a personal preference. Focus point options, that's whether or not you see a focus point in manual focus mode, I like to leave that on, and whether or not you have dynamic area autofocus assist on, I like to leave that on. You can read about what those are in the manual, but I really like having the focus point in manual focus mode. It'll show you whether or not you've got something in focus or not. Low light autofocus, that's something I don't know. It does slow down the focusing, but it's really, really precise. If you're having problems focusing on things that are moving in the dark because you're activating the low light mode, you can turn that off. I haven't found a situation yet where it hasn't been helpful. I always leave it turned on. And the built-in autofocus assist illuminator, that's whether or not you want that light turned on when you're autofocusing. It can be really annoying in certain situations to have this kind of green light from the front of the camera lighting things up, particularly when multiple people are photographing a subject together, in a landscape scene that's popular like Mesa Arch or something. I had someone with a green autofocus indicator that, in my workshop recently, and we turned that thing off immediately because it's like there's a green dot in everyone's photo. Okay, so that's the main autofocus modes that I would have you go through. The next thing I want to take a look at are customizing the actual control layout on the camera. So you're going to come down through custom settings to controls here. That's F. And when you pop in, so if you go left, you can choose the main different categories of the custom settings menu. It's a deep level menu. And then if you click right, you go into the F section. If you scroll up, you're in the E's. It's just a quick way to get around, is to just left and then come back into the part that you want to work on. And we're going to customize the I menu. Now the I menu is something that when you're in the mode shooting with your camera and you hit the I button, up pops this menu, and you can literally just jump in here, change settings really quick. You don't have to go into the deeper level menus, and this is completely customizable. You can set it up exactly how you want it. Each one of these can be reprogrammed to what you want to have there. The stock setting's good, but I have my own little customization that I like. So if you go into your menu and you go into controls, you can customize the I menu. And here's what I have chosen. You can change any of these just by moving around with your D-pad and pushing the OK button in the middle. And that gives you a long list of things you can choose from. So I'll show you how I have mine laid out. Each one of these, you just click the middle button and you can select from a whole list and change it. So I have long exposure noise reduction, and then I have release mode. Since there's not a separate release mode button on this camera, I want to be able to access that really quickly, whether I'm shooting single frame, multiple frame, high speed multiple frame, turning on my timer. The quality, I want to know whether I'm shooting RAW or RAW plus basic JPEG, so that I can just quickly send those JPEGs off via SnapBridge to my phone to share. Image size is particularly important for the JPEGs. So, is it a large JPEG, small JPEG? White balance, change around what the white balance is, whether I've got auto daylight, whether I've just got auto in general, whether I'm choosing cloudy. The metering mode, usually I leave that in matrix metering. But there might be a reason I want to go spot metering or even center weighted, so I put that there since there's not a dedicated metering button. Wi-Fi connection, there's one extra slot in here. I leave that on. I can turn the Wi-Fi on, turn the Wi-Fi off. Exposure delay mode, that's something I use all the time. I also put it in my main menu right at the top. That's going to enable you to press the shutter button, and for the amount of time that you tell it, it's going to wait before it triggers the shutter to open and close. That way your finger's not affecting the shot, not causing any vibration. It's really great. You can use it in lieu of a cable release in low light situations. I use that all the time. Flash mode. This thing has a cute built-in little flash. This lets you change the modes. Image area, that's whether you're shooting in DX mode or whether you decide you want a square crop mode or 16:9 mode. I rarely use that. I mainly crop after the fact, but it can be useful for framing, particularly if you're thinking about shooting a time lapse. It'll let you sort of pick out, frame something up. I probably would capture it in DX mode, the full sensor, before I actually shoot a time lapse as a series of stills with the intervalometer, but it's nice for framing. Autofocus area mode, that's really important. That's a topic that I cover in depth in that shooting action with your Nikon mirrorless camera video. And then what your autofocus mode is, whether you're shooting in manual mode, autofocus continuous or autofocus static, single servo. So all that, I cover all that in that separate video that's linked in the YouTube description. All right, so that pretty much covers that customizing the I menu. If I go back in here in controls, I want to talk about how I customize the external buttons of the camera. So custom controls for shooting. As you can see, it's got the button lit up in yellow. So it's this top function 1 button. And I use depth of field preview for that. That way, if you go to a smaller aperture than f5.6, by pushing that button, you'll get a preview of exactly what that aperture is going to look like on your screen or through your viewfinder. And that's one of the great things with these mirrorless cameras is it's just going to increase the ISO some to keep giving you a nice, clear, bright view with your final aperture locked down, instead of the days of the DSLR where you're actually closing that aperture and looking through the optical viewfinder. It makes everything much darker because less light's flowing in. Function 2 button, the lower of those two buttons on the outside, I like to be bracket. And that's in auto bracketing mode. That's how I access that. I use it all the time. So if you press that button, turn the back dial is going to change how many frames you're bracketing, whether you're bracketing 3, 1 on each side of 0 on the meter, whether you're doing 5, whether you're doing 2, 1 underexposed, 1 on the meter, 3, 2 underexposed, 1 on the meter, or overexposed the other way. That's all accessible with the back dial, and then how many stops apart is accessible with the front dial. So just by holding down that function 2 button, flipping the back dial 1 notch to the left, and choosing how many stops, I could say I want to capture 2 frames, 1 on the meter, 1, 3 stops underexposed, just to protect highlights. And be able to blend those in HDR in post-production. So it's a really handy feature to not have to go into any menu or look around for buttons. While I'm looking through the viewfinder, I can just touch my sort of right hand's ring finger on that function 2 button and swivel my dials, and inside the viewfinder I'll see the settings that I'm changing. It's awesome. So then there's the AEL AFL button, and I set that to AF on. That's that back button autofocus. So now with that set to AF on, that menu function that we selected in the autofocus settings to turn autofocus only on AF on makes this a back button focus camera. The OK button that's in the center of the D-pad when I'm shooting, I have that center the autofocus point in the frame. Now on my Z cameras, I have that actually zoom into 100% really quick to check focus on the focus point that I have selected. But because this camera doesn't have a joystick to run around selecting autofocus points, it's a smaller camera, it's a more affordable camera, it doesn't have this little joystick. In this camera I have that joystick so that when I push the center of it, it centers the focus point, and I use the joystick to run focus points around. So in this case, this camera has buttons on the back for zooming in and out, and if you just hold your finger down, it's not really a button, it's just the right edge of the touchscreen, and if you touch the top right corner of the touchscreen, you'll learn where it is without even looking, and hold it down, it'll zoom instantly into 100%, and then you can do the same thing with the zoom out button. It'll take you right back to fit view. So I just do that instead. So I keep that OK button again to reset the focus point selection. The movie button, movie record button, that's useless if you haven't switched this flip switch into video recording mode. When you're in still recording mode, the video button is dead, the movie recording button. So I set that to change autofocus mode. So the back wheel, while I hold that movie button down, will change from AFS to AFC to manual focus, continuous, single servo, or manual focus. And then the front dial changes area mode, so you can go through, whether it's a pinpoint or whether it's going to be auto area autofocus, like I talk about in the photographing action with Nikon mirrorless camera video. Again, linked in the YouTube description. I've got sections for setting different lens functions. Probably you're not connecting a lens to this camera that has specific function buttons, but maybe if you do, I have that set to autofocus and an auto exposure lock. If I held the button down, you can change that around, set it to some custom button if you setting that you want, just like any of the other buttons here. And the ring on my lens, I have the focusing ring set to manually focus. So there you go. That's you can set different functions for that focusing ring. I like it to focus. For me, focusing ring makes sense to have it focusing. So then the final thing I want to talk about in setting this camera up is adjusting your My Menu. One of the great things about Nikon's DSLRs and mirrorless cameras is this My Menu. You can go in and take any menu functions that you want from its deep range of menus and drop them in any order that you want in your My Menu so that you can get to them anytime that you want. And I'll show you how to set that up and how I have mine set up. So when you scroll over to the left, like we talked about, you can go through the different menus. And the bottom one is the My menu with the little check mark there. And if you go to the bottom of that, yours will just start with this since you have nothing in it when it's new. You've got remove items, add items, rank items. That's for moving things around in the stack. And in your add items, if you click that, it goes into the different menus. So you can go into the custom settings menu, you can go into autofocus, and you can go to AF activation, and we could add that autofocus activation to turn on back button focus or turn it off, and add that to my menu if we wanted to. And then when we did that, we can rank it. I'll put it at the very bottom. I don't want it in my menu because I never turn that off, but I'll put it at the bottom right now so you see how that works. So now you see AF activation is there. If I want to remove it, I click remove. I scroll down to the bottom here to AF activation, click to the right, click the OK button, and click OK, yes, I do want to delete it. So there you go, done. Now I'll show you what I have in here, and I'll explain why. So at the top, I have exposure delay mode. That's because I rarely use a cable release anymore. Again, I use exposure delay mode to avoid shaking the camera in low light situations. I hit the button, take my hand away, it waits the amount of time I tell it, opens and closes the shutter. Format memory card. All my old Nikon DSLRs had a 2-button reset method where you push one button on the back and one button on the front, hold it for 3 seconds, and it goes into memory card formatting mode. That's not available on Nikon's mirrorless cameras, so I just add it to the My menu. It's a couple button clicks. Interval timer shooting. That's for time lapse. I love to capture time lapse as just a series of intervally captured raw files and put them together. That's a way to get a really high quality editable time lapse that there's just no other way to capture. I use that all the time, so I have that in there. Viewfinder brightness. I like to turn both my viewfinder and my monitor way down when I'm photographing the Milky Way and stars and working in low light, so that I don't blow my night vision reviewing images and looking at the histograms. So I turn it way down. My eyes are adjusted for the dark. I want to keep them that way. I turn them up bright in bright situations. Silent photography, super handy for street photography or shooting an event where you don't want to disturb people with the sound of the shutter. That's handy. I keep it in there. Shutter type, that's actually whether or not it's going to have a mechanical shutter or electronic front curtain shutter. What that means is the camera doesn't actually start recording until after it's open a little while. That way, in really long exposures, the shutter opens, it waits a beat before it turns on the sensor to actually record the image, and that's to just eliminate any vibration from the shutter actually opening. And I leave it on auto generally. The camera's smart enough. It's not a great thing to have when you're working with really fast-moving subjects. You can get kind of a rolling shutter effect where there's a blur to fast-moving action because of it. So I leave it on auto. The camera's smart enough to know between a long exposure and a fast exposure whether to turn it on or turn it off. But there's times where you want to make sure you turn it off. There's times you want to make sure you have it on. I don't know. There's some kind of anal part of me that still keeps it there so that I can make sure in really critical situations that it's either on or off. In the Milky Way, I want it turned on. In shooting Formula One, I want it turned off. Exposure steps for exposure control. When I'm working with really lots of neutral density, a lot of times I'll calculate my exposure before putting a 10-stop filter on, and then I like to change my exposure step to a full stop, so I just click the dial 10 times to drop 10 stops of shutter speed to slow everything down. I don't want to have to click it 30 times. 10 times is pretty quick. So that's the reason I have that there. Built-in AF Assist Illuminator. Again, it can be handy in situations where you want to grab focus quick in an event or someplace, and it's not that annoying. But there are times shooting the Milky Way with a group of people or dawn at the Mesa Arch, like I said, where you don't want to be throwing a green dot out on the landscape as everyone else is photographing. So I have that easy to turn off right here in my My menu. Airplane mode, that can save your battery when you don't want Wi-Fi turned on. Or Bluetooth turned on, so I have that accessible. Self-timer, just to change the settings for the self-timer. How many frames do you want to capture after how long a delay? HDMI output, that's something I use more for this kind of work where I have an HDMI cable in recording my screen as I do videos. But if you're doing HDMI out video recording, say to a Adamus recorder or something like that, you can change the settings right here. Or even if you're sending photos out to your TV through HDMI, the settings are right there. Power off delay, that's something, again, I use in these settings where I don't want it to power off all the time while I'm showcasing what's going on in the menu. Flash shutter speed, you can change that around so it doesn't limit you so much when you're working in low lit situations with a little fill flash. If you're a flash photographer, you'll know you like having that setting accessible easily. Exposure compensation for flash, same thing. It's not necessarily got its own button on this lower end mirrorless body, so it's nice to put it there where it's easily accessible. I don't have to dig through the menu for it. And that's it. That's essentially how I have my Nikon Z50 set up to work with as efficiently as possible and as similarly set up as possible to my larger Z6 and Z7. So hope that helps you out. Thanks so much for watching. And if you're new to seeing me do tutorial videos, I do a weekly video called Approaching the Scene. I'd love it if you check it out. And thanks so much to everyone who's a subscriber and who's sharing these videos and liking them. It goes a long way, and I appreciate it a ton. So thanks so much, and we'll see you in the next Approaching the Scene.